The rain hammered against the windows of the small house on the edge of town, and Danny Martinez sat in his living room watching the storm roll across the dark sky outside. And he had lived alone for 3 years now, ever since his divorce, and he preferred the quiet life away from the chaos of the city where he used to work as an engineer. And now he spent his days doing freelance design work from home and his nights reading or watching old movies. And he liked it that way. The knock on the door came at almost midnight, and Danny looked up from his book startled because nobody ever came to his house this late, and especially not during a storm like this. And he got up slowly, walking to the door and wondering if maybe a neighbor needed help, or if someone's car had broken down on the lonely road outside. He opened the door and froze. Standing on his porch was something that should not exist, and a woman towered before him, easily 7 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like polished silver in the porch light, and her eyes were large and entirely black like pools of ink. And her face was humanoid but too perfect, with sharp cheekbones and a narrow chin. And she wore armor that looked organic, like it had grown from her body rather than been put on, and it was cracked and scorched in places, and dark blue blood seeped from a wound on her shoulder. In her arms she held a child, and the small figure was wrapped in tattered cloth, and the child's skin had the same silver shimmer, but duller, and the little one's eyes were closed, and Danny could see the shallow rise and fall of the child's chest. The woman looked at Danny with those impossible black eyes, and she spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes and bells, and somehow he understood her even though she was not speaking English. "Help us, and please." Danny's mind raced, and every instinct told him to slam the door and call the police or the military or someone. But he looked at the child in her arms and saw how the woman swayed on her feet, and how her armor was damaged, and how exhausted she looked. And he made a decision that would change his life forever. Come inside, and quickly. The woman stepped through the doorway, and she had to duck to fit through the frame, and Danny closed the door behind her and locked it out of habit. And then he turned to face this impossible situation, and his heart pounded in his chest. The woman walked into his living room and gently laid the child on his couch, and the little one looked to be about 5 or 6 years old in human terms, and the child's breathing was ragged and weak. And the woman knelt beside the couch and touched the child's face with surprising gentleness. "Your child?" And Danny asked. "Yes, and my daughter, and her name is Kiva, and she is sick." And the woman looked up at Danny, and there was desperation in those alien eyes. "And we have nowhere else to go." Danny swallowed hard and tried to process what was happening, and aliens were real, and they were in his living room, and one of them was a child who needed help, and he had no idea what to do. But he knew he had to do something. "What happened to you, and where did you come from?" The woman stood up and winced as the movement pulled at her wounded shoulder. "And my name is Zara, and I am a warrior of the Kelvari fleet, and we came to this world seeking refuge, but our ship was shot down by the Vrexian hunters who pursue us, and we crashed in the forest north of here, and my mate, and my Kiva's father, and he died in the crash." Danny felt a surge of sympathy despite the strangeness of the situation. "And I'm sorry, and I'm Danny, and what do you need, and how can I help?" Zara looked at him with something like hope. "And my daughter needs medicine, and she was injured in the crash, and her body fights an infection, and without treatment she will die, and I have medical supplies in the survival pack from our ship, but I do not know if they will be enough." And she reached behind her back and pulled out a small metallic case. Danny nodded and "Okay, and let me see what you have, and I'm not a doctor, but maybe I can help somehow." Zara opened the case, and inside were several vials of glowing liquid and some kind of injector device, and strange instruments Danny had never seen before, and she selected one of the vials and loaded it into the injector, and then she moved to her daughter and pressed the injector against the child's neck, and there was a soft hiss. Kiva's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she looked up at her mother and made a soft sound, and then her eyes closed again, and Zara's shoulders sagged with relief. "That will help for now, but she needs rest and time to heal." And Zara looked at Danny. "And you are kind to help us, and most of your kind would not." Danny ran his hand through his hair and, "Yeah, well, and I couldn't just turn away a sick kid, an alien or not." And he looked at the child on his couch, and she looked so human. And mostly Zara managed a small smile. "And our species in the Kelvari, and we share a distant evolutionary ancestor with humans, and millions of years ago, our peoples came from the same source, and that is why we look similar." And she sat down heavily in Danny's armchair. "And we have always felt a kinship with Earth, and even though we have never made official contact until now." Danny sat on the edge of the coffee table. And so why are these Vrexians hunting you? And what's going on? Zara's expression hardened. And the Vrexians are a warrior race that seeks to dominate all other species, and they attacked our homeworld 6 months ago, and destroyed our cities and killed millions of my people, and those of us who survived fled across the galaxy seeking safe harbor, but the Vrexians hunt us still, and they want to eliminate every last Kelvari so that no one can rise against them in the future. That's genocide, and Danny said quietly, yes, and Zara replied, and her voice bitter. And we are a dying people now and scattered and hiding, and I tried to get Kiva to safety and to find a world where she could grow up in peace and Earth seemed like a good choice, and humans are not yet advanced enough in space travel to be noticed by the Vrexian Empire, and you are isolated and safe, and or so I thought. But they followed you, and Danny said. Zara nodded. And yes, and they tracked our ship and shot us down before we could land properly, and I do not know if they will come looking for the crash site, but we must be careful. Danny felt a chill run down his spine, and so there might be more aliens coming, and hostile ones, it is possible. And Zara said, but the Vrexians typically hunt from space, and they do not like to come down to planetary surfaces if they can avoid it, and they prefer to destroy from orbit, and we may be safe if we stay hidden. Danny looked at Kiva sleeping on his couch and then back at Zara. And okay? And so what's the plan? And you can't stay here forever, and eventually, someone will notice. Zara leaned back in the chair, and I do not know yet, and I need time to think and to plan, and Kiva needs time to heal. And she looked at Danny with those dark eyes, and I know this is much to ask, but can we stay here for a few days and just until I can figure out our next move? Danny thought about it, and he thought about the risks and about what would happen if anyone found out. But he also thought about the child on his couch and about Zara's desperation, and he made his decision. Yeah, and okay, and you can stay, but we need to be smart about this, and nobody can know you're here. Thank you, and Zara said, and her voice filled with genuine gratitude, and you are saving our lives. Danny stood up and let me get some supplies, and I've got a first aid kit, and maybe I can help with your shoulder. Zara looked down at her wounded shoulder, and the blue blood had stopped flowing, but the injury looked bad, and that would be kind. And Kelvari. Physiology is similar enough to human that your medical supplies might work. Danny went to the bathroom and grabbed his first aid kit, and when he came back, Zara had removed part of her armor and exposed the wound, and it was a deep gash that looked like it had been caused by shrapnel or something sharp, and the edges of the wound were inflamed. This might hurt. And Danny said as he opened the kitty, I'm a warrior and I have endured worse. And Zara replied, but I appreciate your care. Danny cleaned the wound as best he could and used antiseptic and bandages, and Zara barely flinched even though it must have hurt. And when he was done, he stepped back. And that's the best I can do. And you should probably rest. Zara nodded, and I will sleep here and near my daughter, and she adjusted her position in the chair, and Danny could see how exhausted she was. Danny grabbed a blanket from the closet and draped it over Kiva, and then he got another one for Zara. And the alien warrior woman looked up at him with surprise. You are very kind, and Danny Martinez, and most would fear us maybe. And Danny said, but you're a mother protecting her child, and I understand that, and get some rest, and we'll figure things out in the morning. Zara closed her eyes, and within minutes she was asleep, and Danny stood in his living room looking at the two aliens who had taken refuge in his home, and he wondered what he had gotten himself into. He went to his bedroom, but he could not sleep, and his mind raced with questions and concerns. And what if the Vrexians came looking, and what if someone saw Zara or Kiva, and what if the government found out? And he had seen enough movies to know that would not end well. Finally, around 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went back to the living room, and Zara was awake and sitting up and watching her daughter sleep. Couldn't sleep either. And Danny asked. Zara shook her head. And I keep thinking about everything we have lost, and my mate and my home and my people. And she looked at Danny. And how did you become so calm about all this, and you opened your door to find aliens, and yet you help us without hesitation? Danny shrugged. And I don't know if I'm calm, and I'm pretty terrified. Actually, but when I saw your daughter, and I just knew I had to help, and I couldn't turn you away. You have a good heart, and Zara said. And that is rare in any species. Danny sat down on the couch near Kiva's feet. And can I ask you something? And about The Vrexians, and why are they so focused on wiping out the Kelvari? And what did your people do to them? Zara's expression darkened, and we did nothing to provoke them. And the Vrexians believe that the galaxy belongs to the strong and that weaker species should either serve them or be eliminated, and the Kelvari refused to submit. And we have always been a proud people and warriors in our own right. And when the Vrexians demanded our surrender and we fought back, and they didn't like that. And Danny said no, and Zara replied, and they made an example of us, and they destroyed our world to show others what happens when you resist. And she looked down at her hands, and I was off-world when it happened, and leading a patrol at the edge of our system, and by the time we got back and our planet was burning and billions were dead, Danny felt sick. And I'm so sorry. Zara nodded, and my mate and Kiva's father, and he was a scientist and not a warrior, and he was in our capital city when the attack came, and he survived the initial bombardment and managed to get to an evacuation ship with Kiva. And I met up with them later, and she paused, and her voice thick with emotion, and we spent months running and hiding and trying to find somewhere safe, and he was wounded badly during one of the attacks, and he held on long enough to get us to Earth, but the crash, and she stopped. Danny reached out hesitantly and touched her arm, and he's at peace now, and then you got Kiva out, and that's what matters. Zara looked at him, and yes, and she is all I have left, and I will protect her no matter what. They sat in silence for a while, and then Kiva stirred, and her eyes opened, and she looked around in confusion, and when she saw Danny, she made a small frightened sound. It is all right, little one, and Zara said quickly in that musical language, and he is a friend, and he is helping us. Kiva looked at her mother and then back at Danny, and she said something in her language, and Zara translated. She asks if you are a human, and she has never seen one before. Danny smiled and tried to look friendly, and, yeah, and I'm human, and my name is Danny, and you're safe here. Kiva studied him with those large black eyes, and then she said something else. She says you look strange but not scary. And Zara said with a hint of amusement. Danny chuckled and, well, and you look pretty strange to me too, but in a good way. Kiva managed a weak smile, and Zara helped her sit up, and the child was clearly still weak, but she seemed better than before. Are you hungry? And Danny asked, and I can make some food. Zara shook her head. And we have nutrition packs in my survival case, but thank you. Over the next few days, a strange routine developed, and Zara stayed, mostly in the living room watching over Kiva. And the child grew stronger each day, and the medicine seemed to be working. And Danny continued his work from home and tried to act normal, even though nothing about the situation was normal. He learned more about the Kelvari and their culture and their history. And Zara told him about her world and about the great cities that once stood there, and about the forests and oceans and mountains. And she told him about Kelvari art and music and science. And Danny found himself fascinated. Kiva slowly warmed up to him, and at first she was shy and afraid. But gradually she started to talk to him through Zara's translation, and she asked him questions about Earth and about humans and about everything she saw in his house, and Danny found himself enjoying her curiosity. One afternoon, Danny was working at his desk when Kiva came over and looked at his computer screen, and she pointed at it and said something. She wants to know what that is. And Zara translated from the doorway. It's a computer, and Danny said, and I use it for work and for communication and for entertainment. Kiva's eyes widened, and she reached out to touch the screen, and Danny let her. And she giggled when the cursor moved. Kelvari have similar technology, and Zara said, but Kiva has not seen much of it, and we lived in a small settlement away from the cities. Danny pulled up a video of dolphins swimming, and Kiva watched in amazement, and she clapped her hands and said something excitedly. She loves the sea creatures, and Zara said with a smile. Danny showed Kiva more videos and pictures of Earth and animals and places, and the child was delighted. And for a little while she seemed to forget about everything they had been through, but that night things changed. Danny woke to the sound of Zara's voice speaking urgently in her language, and he got up and rushed to the living room and found Zara standing at the window looking out at the sky. What's wrong? And Danny asked. Ships, and Zara said, and her voice tense, and I can see them in small craft in orbit, and they are scanning the Vrexians. And Danny asked, and his heart racing. I believe so, and Zara moved away from the window, and if they find the crash site, and they will expand their search. What do we do? And Danny asked. We need to hide, and Zara said, and somewhere they will not think to look, and somewhere underground perhaps. Danny thought quickly. And there's an old storm shelter under my garage, and it's pretty deep, and nobody knows about it except me and the previous owner. And would that work? Zara nodded. And yes, and that may be perfect, and we should go. Now, Danny helped them gather their few belongings, and then led them out through the kitchen, to the garage, and in the floor was a metal hatch hidden under some old boxes, and he pulled it open and revealed a ladder leading down into darkness. He climbed down first and found the light switch and old bulbs flickered on, and revealed a concrete room about 15 feet square, and it was dusty and full of old supplies, but it was dry and safe. Zara came down with Kiva, and then Danny climbed back up and closed the hatch and moved the boxes back into place. And then he came back down. This will work, and Zara said, and looking around, and how long has this been here? Since the Cold War, I think. And Danny said, and the previous owner was paranoid about nuclear war. And I never thought I'd actually use it. They settled in, and Danny brought down blankets and food and water, and they waited. Hours passed, and Danny's phone showed nothing unusual happening in town, and no news reports about alien ships, and no military activity. But Zara remained tense and alert. Then around midnight they heard it, and a deep thrumming sound that seemed to come from everywhere, and the walls of the shelter vibrated slightly. They are scanning this area, and Zara whispered, and stay very still and very quiet. Kiva pressed against her mother, and Danny could see the fear in the child's eyes, and he wanted to say something comforting, but he did not dare make a sound. The thrumming grew louder, and then it began to fade, and moving away, and searching elsewhere, and after what felt like forever it disappeared, completely. Zara let out a breath, and they did not find us in the shelter's depth and the earth above us, and it masked our life signs. Danny sagged with relief, and so we're safe for now, and Zara said, but they will keep searching. And we cannot stay here forever. They spent that night in the shelter, and in the morning Danny carefully went back up to check on things, and everything seemed normal, and there were no signs of alien ships or military activity. And he went back down and told Zarawe should stay here for a few more days, and Zara said, and just to be certain, Danny agreed. And over the next 3 days they lived in the cramped shelter, and it was uncomfortable but safe. And Danny got to know Zara and Kiva better, and they became less like aliens to him and more like people and like friends. Kiva asked him questions constantly and about everything, and she wanted to know about human families and human food and human games, and Danny did his best to answer and to keep her entertained. One evening Kiva fell asleep curled up in blankets, and Danny and Zara sat together talking quietly. You are very patient with her, and Zara said, and thank you for that. And this has been hard on her, and losing her father and leaving everything. She knows. She's a good kid, and Danny said, and you're doing a great job with her. Zara smiled sadly. And I try, but I am a warrior and not a teacher or a caregiver. And before all this, I spent most of my time on patrol ships and in battles, and I was not prepared to be a single mother. You're doing fine, and Danny said, and she's healthy and curious, and she feels safe with you. And that's what matters. Zara looked at him, and you would make a good father, and Danny Martinez. And you have the heart. For Danny shrugged, and I thought about having kids once, but my ex-wife didn't want them, and then we divorced, and now. And he trailed off, and now I live alone and work alone, and I guess I gave up on that dream. It is not too late, and Zara said, gently, and you are still young. Maybe, and Danny said, and he looked at Kiva sleeping peacefully, but right now I'm focused on keeping you two safe. Zara reached out and took his hand, and her skin was cool and smooth, and her long fingers wrapped around his. And thank you and for everything, and I know we have disrupted your life, but you have been nothing but kind. Danny squeezed her hand, and you needed help. And I'm glad I see. Or provide it. They sat like that for a while and holding hands in the dim light of the shelter, and Danny felt something he had not felt in years, and a connection and a purpose and a sense that maybe his life was not as empty as he had thought. And the fourth day, Zara decided it was safe to go back upstairs, and Danny went up first to check, and everything was clear. And he helped Zara and Kiva out of the shelter and back into the house. Kiva ran around the living room, happy to have space again, and Zara stretched and winced as her wounded shoulder pulled house the shoulder, and Danny asked, healing, and Zara said, and Kelvari heal faster than humans, and it will be fully recovered in another week or so. That's good. And Danny said, and so what's the plan now? Zara sat down and looked serious, and we cannot stay here forever. And eventually someone will notice us, or the Vrexians will return, and I need to find a way to contact other Kelvari survivors. And there are scattered groups across the galaxy, and if I can reach them, and perhaps they can help us. "How do you plan to contact them?" And Danny asked my ship's communication system and if I can salvage it from the crash site, and I can send a coded message. But that means going back to the forest and finding the wreckage. That sounds dangerous, and Danny said. "It is," and Zara replied, but I do not see another option. "Then I'm coming with you." "And Danny?" said Zara, looked at him in surprise, and "No. And it is too dangerous, and I cannot ask you to risk your life. You're not asking, and I'm offering," and Danny said, "and you need help, and you're still recovering. And besides, and I know the forest around here, and I can guide you." Zara studied him, and then nodded, and very well, but we leave Kiva here, and she will be safe in your home. "When do we go?" and Danny asked. "Tonight." And Zara said, and under cover of darkness, that evening Danny packed supplies and flashlights and a first aid kit and some tools that might be useful. And Zara checked her weapons and a blade that looked like it was made of the same organic material as her armor and some kind of energy weapon that she wore on her hip. Kiva did not want them to go. And she clung to Zara and said something in their language. "I will be back soon, little one." And Zara said gently, "And Danny will protect me, and I will protect him, and we will return before you know it." Danny knelt down and, "Hey, Kiva, and we'll be okay. And I promise. And you stay here and watch TV and eat snacks. And be good." Kiva nodded reluctantly and hugged her mother one more time. They left just after midnight, and Danny drove his truck north toward the forest, and Zara directed him based on her memory of the crash. And they drove for almost an hour down increasingly remote roads until they had to leave the truck and continue on foot. The forest was dark and dense, and Danny led the way with a flashlight while Zara moved silently beside him. And her eyes seemed to see better in the darkness than his. After about 2 miles of hiking, Zara stopped in there and she pointed. Danny looked, and at first he saw nothing. But then he noticed the trees, and they were broken and scorched, and there was a path of destruction leading deeper into the forest. They followed the crash path, and finally they came to a clearing where the wreckage lay, and the ship was about the size of a small airplane, and it was sleek and silver and completely destroyed, and the front half was crumpled, and the rear was torn open, and debris was scattered everywhere. Zara stood looking at the ship, and Danny could see the pain in her eyes. "Your mate." And Danny said quietly, "He is still inside," and Zara said, "And I could not bring his body with me when I fled, and I had to focus on saving Kiva. I'm sorry." And Danny said. Zara nodded, and then she moved toward the wreckage, and Danny followed. They climbed into the broken ship, and inside was even worse, and the walls were scorched, and equipment was shattered, and then Danny saw the body. He was slumped in one of the seats and still strapped in, and his silver skin was pale and his eyes closed, and he looked peaceful. Despite the violence of the crash, Zara knelt beside him and touched his face, and she spoke softly in her language, and Danny did not need a translation to understand that she was saying goodbye. After a few moments, Zara stood, and "We need to find the communication system, and it should be in the rear of the ship." They searched through the wreckage and moving carefully around sharp edges and unstable debris. And finally Zara found what she was looking for, and a small device that looked mostly intact. "This is it," and she said, and holding it up, "And if I can power it and I can send a message, will it work?" And Danny asked. "I do not know. But I have to try." Zara worked on the device for several minutes and connecting wires and adjusting components, and finally it hummed to life, and a soft blue light glowed from its surface. Zara spoke into it in her language, and her voice clear and strong, and she gave coordinates and identification codes and a brief message about their situation. Then she powered it down, and it is done. And now we wait. And if any Kelvari ships are in range, and they will receive the message, and perhaps they will come. Danny nodded, and okay, and let's get out of here, and before someone notices we're here. They climbed out of the wreckage and started back toward the truck. But they had only gone a few hundred yards when Danny heard something and a sound like engines or jets. Zara heard it too, and her hand went to her weapon and Vrexian patrol craft and run. They ran through the forest and crashing through undergrowth and jumping over logs, and behind them the sound grew louder, and then there was a bright light, and a beam of energy sliced through the trees and exploded where they had been standing moments before. The Vrexians had found them. Danny and Zara ran harder, and the forest around them erupted in explosions and fire as the patrol craft fired again and again, and trees fell and the ground shook. "We need to split up," and Zara shouted, "And you go left and I will go right, and they will follow me." "No way," and Danny shouted back, "And we stick together." "There is no time to argue," and Zara grabbed his arm, and please, Danny, and you must survive, and someone needs to take care of Kiva. If I do not make it back before Danny could protest. Zara shoved him hard to the left, and then she sprinted right and firing her energy weapon at the craft above. The patrol craft immediately focused on her and followed her deeper into the forest, and Danny stumbled and caught himself, and watched helplessly as Zara disappeared into the darkness, with the enemy following. He wanted to run after her, but he knew that would be suicide, and instead he did the only thing he could, and he ran back toward his truck and praying that Zara would escape. He reached the truck and jumped in and drove away as fast as he dared, and his hands shaking on the wheel, and behind him the forest lit up with explosions and energy weapons. He made it back to his house and rushed inside and found Kiva asleep on the couch, and he stood there breathing hard and terrified and wondering if he would ever see Zara again. Hours passed, and Danny paced the house and checked his phone and looked out the windows, and Kiva woke up and immediately knew something was wrong. "Where is my mother?" And she asked through the translation device Zara had left behind. She's and Danny did not know what to say, and she had to stay behind, but she'll be back soon. Kiva looked at him with those large black eyes, and Danny knew she did not believe him. The sun began to rise, and Danny had not slept, and he was exhausted and terrified. And then he heard a sound at the door, and a weak knock. He ran to it and threw it open, and Zara stood there, and she was burned and bleeding and barely standing. But she was alive. Danny caught her as she fell and helped her inside, and Kiva rushed over crying and hugging her mother. "What happened?" And Danny asked as he helped Zara to the couch. "I led them away," and Zara said weakly. "And then I hid until they gave up the search, and I destroyed their patrol craft with a well-placed shot, but not before. They hit me again," and she gestured to new burns on her armor and skin. "You're crazy." And Danny said, "But thank you, and you saved my life." "You saved mine first," and Zara replied with a tired smile. "And now we are even." Danny got the first aid kit and started treating her injuries, and Kiva stayed close to her mother and held her hand over the next few days. Zara recovered, and her injuries healed with impressive speed, and life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be, with 2 aliens hiding in Danny's house. Then one night, 2 weeks after their trip to the forest, something changed. Danny was woken by a bright light outside his window, and he got up and looked out and saw a ship hovering over his yard. But this ship was different, and it was Kelvari. Zara appeared beside him, and her expression hopeful. "And they came, and my people, and they received my message." They went outside, and a ramp lowered from the ship, and several Kelvari warriors descended, and they were all tall and silver-skinned like Zara, and they wore similar armor. One of them stepped forward, and she was clearly the leader, and she spoke in the Kelvari language. "Commander Zara." And the leader said, and Zara translated for Danny, "And we received your distress call, and we are here to take you to safety." Zara bowed her head, and "Thank you, Captain, but I cannot leave yet." And she looked at Danny, "And this human saved our lives, and he has risked everything to protect us, and I will not abandon." And the captain looked at Danny with surprise. "And a human helped you?" "Yes," and Zara said, "And his name is Danny Martinez, and he opened his home to us when we had nowhere else to go, and he protected us from the Vrexians, and he asked for nothing in return." The captain studied Danny for a long moment, and then she spoke again. "You have done a great service to the Kelvari and Danny Martinez, and we do not forget our debts." And she looked back at Zara. "And if you wish, and he may come with us, and we can offer him sanctuary." Danny's eyes widened. "And wait, and what? And you want me to leave Earth? You do not have to." And Zara said quickly, "But if you stay, and eventually the Vrexians may learn of your involvement, and they will come for you." And she looked at him seriously. "And you are not safe here anymore." Danny looked at his house and at his quiet life, and then he looked at Zara and Kiva, and he thought about the past few weeks and about how alive he had felt and how much he had come to care about them. And then he made his decision. "Okay, and I'll go, and let me just grab a few things." Within an hour, Danny had packed a bag with clothes and his laptop and a few personal items, and he looked around his house one last time, and then he locked the door and walked away from his old life. On the ship, Zara showed him to a small quarters, and Kiva bounced excitedly nearby. "You are coming with us," and Kiva said through the translator. "And I am so happy." "Me too, kid," and Danny said, and ruffling her hair or whatever passes for hair on your head. Zara smiled, "And thank you, Danny, and for everything, and for giving us hope when we had none." Danny looked at her. "And so, what happens now?" And where are we going? The captain says, there is a Kelvari colony on a distant world and far from Vrexian space, and we will be safe there. And Zara said, and it is small and still being built, but it is a new home. And you want me there? And Danny asked. Yes, and Zara said, and her voice soft, and if you will, have us, and Kiva needs a father figure, and I. And she paused, and I have come to care for you deeply, and I know it is strange, and a human and a Kelvari, but Danny reached out and took her hand, and it's not strange. And he said, and it feels right. Zara smiled, and relief and joy in her eyes. The ship lifted off, and Danny watched through a viewport as Earth fell away below, and he was leaving his world and his species and everything he had ever known. But somehow, he was not afraid. Because he was not alone. He had Zara, and he had Kiva, and he had a new purpose and a new family. And maybe, and just maybe, and that was enough. The ship jumped to faster than light travel, and stars streaked past the viewport. And Danny stood with Zara and Kiva beside him, and together they flew toward a new future, toward home.